I'm going to talk about several ideas that I've been working on through several papers and works. So that's why it's so exciting for me. So let me start with giving you a broad overview of the phenomenon and what I'm going to talk about. So we are going to talk about first person authority as a distinctive normative state individuals enjoy when communicating their own mental states. So when we talk to our family, our friends, even total strangers, and we say, I want an ice cream, or today is going to remain cloudy, or I have plans to go to the concert today. So normally people do, or we expect them to give us the last word on our mental states. So that is what we call deference to first person authority. They will normally believe what we say about what we desire, our intentions, our beliefs, and perspectives. It's normative because there is this expectation and some sense of ought about what people ought to do. The phenomenon of first person authority has been debated, has been explored through 40 years, but is in particular through debates about self knowledge. So the stereotypical picture of the debate is one in which first person authority is just the expression of self knowledge. And then the lesson of my talk is that, well, now it seems that it's time for a change because the phenomenon seems broader, or at least it doesn't totally coincide with the phenomenon of self-knowledge, because it's a relational and a communicative phenomenon with a particular structure that I say that is epistemic and ethical. Let me just record my time not to miss. So that is the broad view of what we are getting today. So let me talk a little bit more about this 40 years of debate on first person authority. So the one of the classic reference is this paper by Davidson, which is entitled First Person Authority, in which he characterized FPA as the presumption that a speaker is generally right when sincerely attributing mental states to herself. For example, as I said before in the examples, I'm in severe pain. I believe the argument is sound. I regret not taking the job. So, through these years, the explanatory task was to understand the basis of this authority. And the proposal was, well, the basis must be in how we know our minds. So people defer to FPA because they are responding to this special, epistemically superior and different way of knowing our own mental states. So the debate is basically the one between epistemic versus non-epistemic models of self-knowledge. So in the classic epistemic, or at least in the most automatic model of epistemic model, is one in which we know better our minds because we have a privileged access that others lack. But there are other epistemic models. In the non-epistemic models, which reject that explanation, they will characterize self-knowledge in different ways or different relations that we have with our minds. One example is the one in which we are agents of our minds. We constitute our mental states, and that is the basis of self knowledge. So, when people are responding to first person authority, they are responding to that particular control that we have over our mental states. So, in broad strokes, this 4 years of debate is a debate regarding the basis of FPA as self knowledge, lying either in the subject's privileged access to their mind or in the distinctive security of avowals themselves. I'm referring here to the distinctive security of avowals because this was the maneuver of the non epistemic accounts of self knowledge when they reject the idea of privileged access. So many models would look at the avowal, so mental self-ascriptions that are formed in this first personal way, they show a certain distinctive security. So there is a whole debate about that. As part of this same debate, there were some challenges to FPA. So some people press on the fact that, well, sometimes there are systematic failures of self-knowledge. So I'm just citing these two papers by Schwitz-Gable and Snowdon, in which they give several examples in which actually this first personal self-knowledge lead us to mistaking mental self-ascriptions. And then the conclusion would be, well, if you are all the time or many in many circumstances we commit so many mistakes, how can we say or how can we even defend that there is this phenomenon called first personal authority? A different line of skepticism regarding FPA can be found in this paper by Bars, in which he proposes a dilemma. He says, well, either FPA as characterized in the literature is false or is irrelevant. There is no distinctive feature of FPA that distinguishes it as a phenomenon when in comparison to testimony or in comparison to other phenomena, for example, the presumption of correctness. And I think that he's right in that regard, right? We don't only presume avowals to be correct, but we also presume other types of claims to be correct in testimony, right? So we presume testimony about the weather or the other subject matters to be correct just because of the how our practices are of testimony. We have to presume in order to communicate or this kind of idea. My reply is that rather than threatening the phenomenon itself, these skeptical concerns motivate a redirection of debate. So that is the what is the meaning of this slogan. There is now time for a change. So it's a methodological redirection rather than engaging with challenges and engaging with a different explanation of FPA by explaining self-knowledge. And I'm going to say that there is not only a need to redirect the debate, but there is a clear need to highlight the importance of FPA. So contra Bars, deference to FPA is not merely a matter of presuming a given claim to be correct. So in this paper from last year, First Person Authority and Epistemic Injustice, I propose a different and a stronger notion of deference to FPA. So defer to first person authority is not merely to presume it to be correct, but it's something closer to giving the speaker the last word on the mental state that this person is communicating to us. Right? Uh, is a preemptive practice of taking the claim as not only a mere evidence that is added to the set of evidence that you have, but it preempts your reasons that you have, right? So that's the meaning of giving the speaker the last word. Contra skepticism about self-knowledge. I'm going to go through two arguments in a bit, in which I say understand FPA is not merely a matter of settling the debate about self-knowledge. But most importantly, so that is one idea that I developed in this short, brief book that is called The First Person Authority of Children. FPA has a special place in the acknowledgement of our personhood. So there is an intrinsic linkage in deferring to FPA in treating someone as a person. So that is an idea that I develop in this book. And I'm going to give one example now. So we are going to watch together certain passages from a YouTube video by an autistic person, autistic YouTuber. And the video is from 20 years ago, but it goes to the point that I want to make. that connects personhood and communication and FPA to my understanding. So that is the video that we are going to see now.
This is from a handout I gave while speaking in a training for staff who work for people with developmental disabilities. It is about what it means to be dehumanized, and it applies to a far broader group of people than the original audience. It is to make this clear about something that is done to us by other people, not something intrinsic to who we are.
So this was only the introduction in which Silent Meow, so that is the name that the YouTuber uses. So she introduces where this text is coming from. So it's a talk that she gave to the staff of this institution, and she gives lots of examples of what it means to be treated as a non-person. But there is one part that interests to us in particular. So I'm going to move forward to this part.
You exist at all. Being an unperson means being considered non-communicative. If you somehow, once in a blue moon, manage to communicate in speech, those words will be seen in pathological terms rather than communicative ones. If you communicate in writing, people will question your authorship. If you communicate with behavior, you will be punished, restrained, drugged, or put on a behavior program. No matter how clever and intricate a communication system you devise, you will be described as incapable of true communication.
So this is the video that I want us to watch together. I'm going to read again the parts that highlights the linkage for us. And here's the part. Being a non-person means being considered non-communicative. If you somehow, once in a blue moon, manage to communicate in speech, those words will be seen in pathological terms rather than communicative ones. If you communicate in writing, people will question your authorship. If you communicate with behavior, you'll be punished, restrained, drugged, or put on a behavior program. No matter how clever and intricate a communication system you devise, you'll be described as incapable of true communication. Being an unperson means being treated like a child, which should really make people think about how they view children, or at best, like a beloved pet. So here, I take it to be an example of the linkage, the intrinsic linkage between being acknowledged as a person, being treated as a communicative person, as your interlocutor, and being the first person authority. One, because first person authority belongs in communication, because it's through communication that I communicate my mental states, and through communication that you defer to me. And because of the content of communication, I'm not going to put in terms of possibilities, but it's part of our communication that we communicate our perspectives, our feelings, even when we are not talking directly about them, we are expressing them. So that is the basic linkage that I developed better in the book that I mentioned. And now we are going to pass to the two arguments for redirecting the debate on first person authority. So we now saw one strong case for the importance of FP8 and how broad the phenomenon is. And now we are going to see two arguments for redirecting the debate beyond discussions on self knowledge. So the first is the substantive self knowledge argument. And I got inspired, actually, I take the example by Talia Becher on transidentity from a book chapter, but before, let me make some terminological comments. So I'm going to use in the argument, so it's a very brief argument, the notion of traditional view on FPA, according to which FPA is explained by the same features that explain first personal self-knowledge. So this is basically the 4 years of the debate that I've characterized before is a methodological claim, right? It just says, well, if you want to understand what FBA is, just explain self-knowledge and you are going to get it. Or take one phenomenon that explains both. And the traditional view is also committed to a sharp contrast between first personal self knowledge. So, the type of self knowledge that is special, is acquired by a special uh, way, being epistemic or non epistemic, is different from the way that we know other people's minds and is also superior, and it contrasts with what we call substantive self-knowledge that might be acquired through reflection, through self-reflection, through contrasting evidence, through looking at our behavior, that puts it closer to how we get to know other people's minds. So the first premise is, if the traditional view of FBA is correct, mental self-ascriptions that are not the result of first personal self-knowledge, for example, substantive self-knowledge, should not be treated as enjoying FBA. Because the basis of FBA, according to the traditional view, is simply first personal self-knowledge. And then I think Betcher give us one extraordinary example of several claims. For example, a claim, I am a woman, said by a trans woman, in which in politically problematic environments is doubted, is put into question, but it should be acknowledged or it should enjoy first personal authority in the same way that simple claims like I'm in pain enjoy first personal authority, but the claim itself, I'm a woman said by a trans person, can be eventually reached by this first personal self knowledge, but in many cases we know it's not reached in this way, it's reached through an extensive, maybe painful path in forming one's own identity. It's not even a clear ascription of mental state, but let's assume that, okay, this is a claim that enjoys the same type of FBA as avowals should enjoy, and then the conclusion, you may guess, the standard view is incorrect in the sense that you don't explain one phenomenon by explaining the other. I'm not saying that first self-knowledge is irrelevant to the story, but what I'm saying is that FBA is not explaining solely by the same features that explain first personal self-knowledge. So that is one brief argument. And this, so as I said, I actually mentioned these examples in several papers, but in particular in this one from last year, I explore it in more details. So the other argument that I've explored in several papers and in the book is the ontogenesis argument, and it goes as follows. Prelinguistic children, let me move because it's on my text, produce communicative acts that communicate their mental states even in the absence of representational capacities of their minds, that is, developed self knowledge capacities. The second premise, adults can and in fact do treat such communications with deference typical of first person authority. Conclusion, thus FBA is not only explained by the same features that explain first personal self-knowledge. But let me go more into details regarding premise one. So premise one is the one that says prelinguistic children produce communicative acts that communicate their minds, even in the absence of self-knowledge. So I've been working on interdisciplinary research with developmental psychology regarding the onset of communication, and it's a strong consensus that the prelinguist children produce communicative acts at least near their first year of life. We believe that is earlier, but around 11, 12 months, they will produce communicative acts when they are capable of communicating by pointing. This is quite solid, I would say. But they are not linguistic. They are not going to say sentences, I mean, typical children, and much less vowels, much less mental self-ascriptions. So but their performance of communicative acts are very rich. So in the point two, you can see a list of different types of point: imperative, declarative as expressive, declarative as informative. That only means that children or infants, prelinguistic infants, can perform a variety of communicative acts. For example, request the ball that is on the table, or share a perspective on a given scene. For example, sharing the excitement about the plane that is flying over there. Look, so pointing, smiling, look back to the interlocutor in this attitude of trying to share a particular attitude, but also giving needed information for their interlocutor. So pointing where the keys are for the interlocutor who is searching for the keys. So there is a variety of communicative acts that the infants can perform before they become speakers. And my argument here is that communication with children at this age will only be successful not only if you get the referent, but also if you. What is the mental state guiding that particular communicative um, act? And the third point is that we lack empirical evidence in support of the idea that prelinguistic children at the age of 11, 12 months old represent their own minds as being their own minds, as having those concepts. That I would take it to be necessary to have self-knowledge, or at least the type of self-knowledge that has been discussed in the standard debate on first-person authority. Our current empirical data speaks against the presence of such a capacity in that age frame. So that is the argument again. So we saw premise one. Premise two, so the support for premise two is just examples. If we deal with children as communicators and you act as responding to them in the sense of deference, I think that you can relate to that. For example, if you give, let's work with non-linguistic children, but pre-linguistic children. So if you give them the choice between two types of food, so which one do you want? Banana or cucumber? So you are asking something for the children. The infant, in this case, point to the one that they want to eat or make a movement, and you get the answer, and then you allow them, so you allowing them to choose and you acting accordingly, I understand as a type of deference to first person authority. So the same way when they communicate that they are, for example, satiated in during meal, right? So I ate, and so they make this movement of rejection to you in a very explicit and communicative manner. And then you have two choices, right? Or maybe more than two, but one choice is to push and no, you need to eat the whole thing on the plate, or you defer to that communication. Well, you can defer in two ways, right? You can defer theoretically by accepting that, well, they are showing that they are satiated, but nevertheless, practically speaking, I know that they need to eat. So you can have this distinction between settling the theoretical and the practical question in different ways. But let's say, for the sake of the argument, that if you follow your infant's communication that they are associated and you allow them to not eat anymore, you are also deferring to first person authority. And that relates to something that we saw maybe with the video, right? So respecting this sphere of autonomous agents as well, right? Because it responds to the boundaries of your body, right? So allowing, so I'm talking a lot about meals and stuff because I think that they are very, so these are circumstances that are very rich for us to understand the phenomenon when dealing with adult infant communication. So the conclusion, as you can see, is FPA is not only explained by the same features that explain first personal self knowledge. So the conclusion of the two arguments have been negative, right? So they said, well, FPA is not explained by the same features, but I take it that both arguments also give us some hints on what would be the positive picture of FPA. And I'm going to say that in a moment. Right, so the conclusions reached so far. So, with some of these examples, I think we are in a good situation to say or to defend that FBA is a phenomenon of key importance. It is connected to how we treat people as persons, and that connects also with this ethical aspect of the phenomenon. Recall the silent meow video, Batcher's example, and also communication with children that are denied in certain circumstances, both the status as communicators and persons, and that not by coincidence also denied even the possibility to be treated as first person authorities. And with particularly with these two arguments, understanding FPA goes beyond questions of self-knowledge in two ways. The communication of our minds happens developmentally before language. Thus, avowals are not the only loci of FPA. So remember, if your story or your explanation of FPA lies entirely in the explanation of the security of the avowals, then your explanation is short-sighted, right? So you're missing a whole dimension of the phenomenon, namely the ones that are not happening through avowals. And the basis of deference to FPA is not only people's cognitive apparatus, but is fundamentally relational, interpersonal. So it's not only about finding something particularly happening inside the person's mind that will grant us the justification to defer to that person, but is a relational phenomenon, and also the norms of deference should refer to that interpersonal relation. So this is my last slide. So my proposing, finally, I'm using the title of the talk, but the idea here is that actually the redirection of the discussion actually means to understand the structure of FPA in these terms of epistemic ethical structure, or in other terms, to understand what are the norms of deference to FPA. Once we understand that FPA is relational, so there is someone who says something, the other person responds, and is communicative, so it because it belongs to communication. I'm not saying that self-knowledge is not relevant, particularly when we are dealing with neurotypical adults. So self-knowledge will play a role here. In relation to what I say in the second bullet point, that is, well, parts of the basis of deference lies in the accuracy of the communication of people's minds in the sense that, well, it matters for us to defer to FPA that is mostly correct or that particular instance is correct, right? If I'm saying, well, I'm tired now, it's important that I'm tired somehow or that there is a part of my feeling that connects to that communication. But accuracy here is broader than self-knowledge, right? Because it should apply also to pre-linguistic and non-linguistic communication of mental states. And here there is a return to Davidson because I understand that the very conditions of communication require us to work with this the full assumption that people are correct. So it's very hard for us to communicate if I'm doubting every single sentence that you're saying, including about your mind. So this is yeah, if you remember, so one of the main arguments in the Davidsonian picture, but of course, he's very intellectualist. I want to include also non-linguistic communication. That's why I talk about accuracy. But I also say that accuracy is simply not enough because why should accuracy alone ground deference to FPA? Because I could simply ask your partner or your friend about how you're feeling, your opinions are, but why is so important to ask you? So I've been rejecting the idea that it's so important because you know your mind best only. It's so important because that relates to the agent that you are. It's very important for us. So that's why I'm referring here to the value of autonomous agency to speak your own mind, right? So to speak for yourself is something that we value. And that is what we ultimately explain why it's so important to ask the kid and not only the mom or the parent about what the kid wants or all kinds of things, right? So it's important for us not only because of epistemic factors or accuracy factors, but also because of these ethical reasons of valuing autonomous agency. And here is important also to differentiate between capacities and the value of autonomous agency, right? Because we can work with different notions of autonomous agency, according to which we can broaden and include in fact non-human animals, and that seems to be a good maneuver. But what I'm saying is that the trick is not to expand or to enlarge the capacity in order to include everyone who we want to take as autonomous agency, but to look at the value. So when we talk about infants, it's important to acknowledge that they are not fully agents in the sense of being able to run a critical reasoning about all kinds of subject matters, right? So we can acknowledge that. But it's still in deferring to the pointing of a 1 year old infant saying that, well, they want the cucumber. What we are responding to is to value, to the value of autonomous agency. Of course, there is a pedagogical side of it, but we are responding to the value of, okay, that matters for us, right? To treat people as autonomous agents. And then people understood in this inclusive sense, right? That has also been very much ignored, I guess, in the debate. And with this, I finish with a quote that I like very much from the YouTuber video that I mentioned before, Silent Meow, in which she says, "Now I'm sometimes an unperson and sometimes a real person, depending on who is around me." So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.